When my husband Mark gave me the heirloom ring that had been in his family for generations, I felt like I was finally being accepted into his world. The ring was beautiful, a delicate gold band with a sparkling emerald at its center. It had belonged to his grandmother, and now it was mine. Mark said it symbolized our love and the future we were building together. But from the moment I slipped it onto my finger, I could feel his mother's eyes on me, cold and calculating. She never said it outright, but I knew she didn't think I deserved it. She had always been polite to my face, but there was something in her tone, in the way she looked at me, that made me feel like an outsider in my own home. One evening after a family dinner at her house, I noticed the ring was missing. I panicked, tearing apart my purse, my pockets, even retracing my steps through the house. Mark tried to calm me down, saying it would turn up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Days turned into weeks, and the ring was nowhere to be found. I started to wonder if I'd been careless, if I'd lost something so precious. But deep down, I couldn't shake the suspicion that his mother had something to do with it. She had always been possessive of Mark, and she made no secret of her fondness for his ex-girlfriend Clara. Clara was everything I wasn't: polished, poised, and, according to my mother-in-law, the one who got away. Then one afternoon, everything changed. I was scrolling through social media when a photo stopped me cold. There was Clara, smiling brightly, her hand resting on a coffee cup, and on her finger was the ring, my ring. My heart raced as I zoomed in, hoping I was wrong, but there was no mistaking it: the emerald, the delicate gold band. I felt sick. How could she have it? I showed the photo to Mark, and his face went pale. He stammered, trying to come up with an explanation, but I could see the guilt in his eyes. He knew something. I demanded answers, and after a long, tense silence, he finally admitted it. His mother had taken the ring from our house and given it to Clara, saying it belonged to someone who truly deserved it. I was furious. How could she do this? How could Mark let her? I felt betrayed, not just by his mother, but by him too. He tried to defend her, saying she was just trying to keep the peace, but I wasn't having it. This wasn't about peace. It was about control. She didn't think I was good enough for her son, and she was willing to go to extreme lengths to prove it. I knew I had to get the ring back, but I also knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed to confront Clara, but I wasn't sure how she'd react. Would she even believe me? I decided to reach out to Clara directly. To my surprise, she agreed to meet me. When we sat down, I showed her the photo and explained the situation. Her face fell as she realized what had happened. She had no idea the ring was an heirloom or that it had been stolen. She thought it was a gift from Mark's mother, a token of their past relationship. Clara was horrified and immediately took the ring off, handing it back to me. She apologized profusely, saying she never would have accepted it if she'd known the truth. I thanked her, but I couldn't shake the anger I felt toward my mother-in-law. This wasn't just about the ring. It was about respect, about boundaries, about my place in this family. The next day, I confronted my mother-in-law. She was sitting in her living room sipping tea as if nothing was wrong. I placed the ring on the table in front of her and asked her why she did it. At first, she tried to deny it, but when I told her Clara had returned the ring, her face turned red with anger. She lashed out, saying I wasn't worthy of the ring, that I didn't understand the family's traditions, that I was just a phase Mark would outgrow. Her words cut deep, but I stood my ground. I told her this wasn't just about the ring. It was about her trying to control Mark's life, about her refusing to accept me as his wife. I said if she couldn't respect me, then she didn't deserve to be part of our lives. Mark walked in during the middle of the argument. For the first time, he didn't try to defend his mother. Instead, he stood by my side, telling her she had crossed a line. He said he loved me and that I was his family now. His mother was stunned, but she didn't apologize. She just sat there, silent and seething. As we left, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, anger, but also a strange sense of empowerment. I had stood up for myself, and for the first time, Mark had stood up for me too. The ring was back on my finger, but it meant more to me now than it ever had before. It wasn't just a symbol of love. It was a symbol of strength, of the battles I had fought and won. And as I looked at it, I knew I would never let anyone take it away from me again. After the confrontation with my mother-in-law, things were tense for a while. Mark and I tried to move forward, but the shadow of what had happened lingered. His mother didn't reach out to apologize, and I didn't expect her to. Instead, she doubled down on her behavior, making passive-aggressive comments to Mark whenever they spoke. She would call him and say things like, "I hope you're happy with your choices," or "I just want what's best for you, even if you don't see it." It was clear she wasn't going to let this go easily. Mark tried to brush it off, but I could see it was wearing on him. He loved his mother, and her disapproval hurt him more than he wanted to admit. A few weeks later, I noticed something strange. Mark started acting distant, like he was hiding something. He would take phone calls in another room, and when I asked who it was, he would just say, "Work stuff." But I knew something was off. One evening, while he was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't want to invade his privacy, but my gut told me to look. The message on the screen was from Clara. My heart sank as I read it. "I'm sorry about everything. Let me know if you need to talk." I felt a wave of panic. Why was Clara texting him? What did they need to talk about? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When Mark came out of the shower, I confronted him. At first, he tried to downplay it, saying Clara had just reached out to apologize again. But I could tell there was more to it. Finally, he admitted that his mother had been pressuring Clara to reconnect with him. She had been feeding Clara stories about how unhappy Mark was in our marriage, how he missed the life he used to have. Clara had reached out to him out of concern, but Mark assured me he had no interest in rekindling anything with her. He said he loved me, and that his mother's meddling wouldn't change that. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't help feeling uneasy. His mother was relentless, and I didn't know how much longer we could keep fighting her off. The next day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I called Clara and asked to meet her again. This time I wanted to make it clear that her involvement in our lives needed to end. When we met, Clara looked nervous. She apologized again and said she hadn't realized how much damage she was causing. I told her that while I appreciated her honesty, she needed to stop communicating with Mark. She agreed, but she also warned me that my mother-in-law wasn't going to stop. She said, "She's determined to break you two apart. You need to be careful." Her words stuck with me. I knew she was right, but I didn't know what to do about it. That evening, I sat down with Mark and told him everything Clara had said. He looked defeated, like he was tired of the constant drama. He said, "I don't know how to make her stop. She's my mom, but she's tearing us apart." I could see the pain in his eyes, and it broke my heart. I told him we needed to set boundaries, that we couldn't let her control our lives anymore. He agreed, but I could tell he was struggling with the idea of cutting her off completely. It was a difficult situation, and I didn't have all the answers. All I knew was that I couldn't let her win. A few days later, we received a letter in the mail. It was from my mother-in-law's lawyer. The letter claimed that the heirloom ring was part of the family estate, and that I had no legal right to keep it. It demanded that I return the ring immediately or face legal action. I couldn't believe it. She was willing to go this far just to hurt me. Mark was furious. He called his mother and demanded she drop the issue, but she refused. She said the ring belonged to the family, not to me, and that she would do whatever it took to get it back. It was clear she wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. No matter what I did, she kept finding new ways to attack me. I knew I couldn't let her take the ring, but I also didn't want to drag this out in court. I needed a way to end this once and for all. That's when I remembered something Mark had told me when he first gave me the ring. He said his grandmother had left a letter with it, explaining its history and significance. I had never read the letter, but now I wondered if it could help me. I searched through our old boxes until I found it. The letter was written in elegant handwriting, and as I read it, I realized it might be the key to ending this fight. But I had no idea how much more complicated things were about to get. The letter from Mark's grandmother was tucked inside an old, faded envelope. As I carefully unfolded it, I could feel the weight of its history. The handwriting was delicate, each word carefully chosen. It began with a heartfelt message about love, family, and the importance of passing down traditions. But as I read further, my heart started to race. The letter revealed something I never expected. The ring wasn't just a family heirloom. It was part of a larger inheritance, one that came with specific conditions. According to the letter, the ring was meant to be given to the woman who truly deserved it, as judged by the family matriarch. But there was a catch. If the ring was ever taken or given away without the matriarch's consent, the entire inheritance could be forfeited. I sat there, stunned. This changed everything. My mother-in-law hadn't just given the ring to Clara out of spite. She was trying to manipulate the inheritance. If I kept the ring, she could argue that I had no right to it, potentially jeopardizing Mark's share of the family estate. But if I gave it back, I would be letting her win. I felt like I was caught in a trap with no easy way out. I needed to talk to Mark, but I wasn't sure how he would react. Would he side with me, or would he feel pressured to protect his family's legacy? When Mark came home that evening, I showed him the letter. His face went pale as he read it. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and frustration. "She's been playing us this whole time," he said. "This isn't just about the ring, it's about control. She's trying to force us to do what she wants." I could see the conflict in his eyes. He loved his family, but he also loved me. This wasn't just a fight over a piece of jewelry, it was a battle for our future. We spent hours discussing what to do. Mark suggested we consult a lawyer to see if the letter had any legal standing. I agreed, but I also knew we needed to act quickly. His mother wasn't going to wait for us to figure things out. The next morning, we met with a family lawyer who specialized in estate disputes. He read the letter carefully and then looked at us with a serious expression. "This is complicated," he said. "The letter could be seen as a binding condition of the inheritance, but it's not clear-cut. If your mother-in-law takes this to court, it could get messy." The lawyer advised us to try to resolve the issue outside of court if possible. He suggested we arrange a meeting with Mark's mother and present the letter to her. If she understood the potential consequences of her actions, she might back down. It was a long shot, but it was worth a try. Mark and I agreed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much bigger fight. We called Mark's mother and asked her to meet us at a neutral location, a quiet cafe in town. When we arrived, she was already there, sitting at a table with a smug expression on her face. She clearly thought she had the upper hand. Mark started the conversation by showing her the letter. At first, she tried to dismiss it, saying it was just an old woman's ramblings. But when Mark explained the potential legal implications, her confidence wavered. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "You think you're so clever," she said, "but you'll never be part of this family." Her words stung, but I refused to let her see how much they hurt. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "This isn't about being part of the family. It's about respect. You can't control Mark's life, and you can't control mine. If you keep pushing this, you're only going to hurt yourself." For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but then she stood up and walked out without another word. Mark and I sat there in silence, unsure of what to do next. We had taken a stand, but we didn't know if it would be enough. As we left the cafe, I couldn't help but wonder what she would do next. Would she drop the issue, or would she find another way to attack us? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her win. No matter what happened, I was going to fight for my marriage, for my place in this family, and for the future Mark and I were building together. But little did I know the fight was about to take a turn I never saw coming. A few days after the meeting with Mark's mother, things seemed quiet. Too quiet. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but there was no word from her. No legal threats, no more messages from Clara. It felt like the calm before the storm, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming. Mark tried to reassure me, saying maybe she had finally realized she couldn't win, but I wasn't convinced. His mother wasn't the type to give up easily. Then, one evening, Mark's phone rang. It was his father. Mark's parents had been divorced for years. and his father rarely called unless it was something important. Mark answered, and I could tell from his expression that something was wrong. He listened quietly, his face growing pale, and then he said, "I'll be right there." He hung up and turned to me. "We need to go to the hospital. My mom had a heart attack." The news hit me like a punch to the gut. Despite everything she had done, she was still Mark's mother, and I could see the fear and guilt in his eyes. We rushed to the hospital, and when we arrived, Mark's father was waiting for us. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. He explained that Mark's mother had collapsed at home and was rushed to the hospital. The doctors were still running tests, but it didn't look good. Mark went in to see her, and I stayed in the waiting room with his father. We didn't talk much, there wasn't much to say. But after a while, he turned to me and said, "She's always been stubborn, but this was too much. She pushed herself too hard." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me felt sorry for her, but another part of me couldn't forget everything she had done. When Mark came back, he looked shaken. He sat down next to me and said, "She's awake, but she's weak. She wants to talk to both of us." I wasn't sure I was ready to face her, but I knew I had to. We went into her room together, and the sight of her lying in the hospital bed, hooked up to machines, was jarring. She looked so small, so vulnerable, nothing like the strong, controlling woman I had come to know. She motioned for us to sit down, and then she began to speak. Her voice was weak, but her words were clear. "I've made a lot of mistakes," she said. "I let my pride and my need for control get in the way of what really matters." She looked at Mark, her eyes filled with tears. "I am sorry, Mark. I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted what I thought was best for you." Mark reached out and took her hand. "Mom, I love you, but you can't keep trying to control my life. Emma is my wife, and she's the person I choose to be with. You need to accept that." His mother nodded, but then she turned to me. "Emma, I owe you an apology too. I was wrong about you. I let my own insecurities cloud my judgment, and I hurt you in the process. I hope one day you can forgive me." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to put all of this behind us, but another part of me was still angry. I nodded and said, "Thank you for saying that. I hope we can move forward." It wasn't a full forgiveness, but it was a start. As we left the hospital that night, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a strange sense of hope. Maybe this was the turning point we needed. Maybe now we could finally start to heal. But as we drove home, Mark's phone buzzed with a text. It was from Clara. "I heard about your mom. I'm so sorry. Let me know if you need anything." Mark showed me the message, and we both sighed. Even in the midst of everything, his mother's influence was still there, lingering in the background. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not yet. There were still secrets to uncover, wounds to heal, and battles to fight. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the right path. We had faced the storm, and we were still standing. And no matter what came next, I was ready to face it, with Mark by my side. Over the next few weeks, Mark's mother slowly recovered, but things between us remained tense. She had apologized, but actions speak louder than words, and I wasn't ready to fully trust her yet. Mark and I tried to focus on our life together, but the shadow of everything that had happened still loomed over us. Then, one afternoon, Mark came home with a strange look on his face. He handed me an envelope and said, "This came for you. It's from my mom." I opened the envelope and found a handwritten letter inside. It was longer than I expected, and as I read it, my heart began to race. In the letter, Mark's mother revealed something she had kept hidden for years, a secret that changed everything. She confessed that the heirloom ring wasn't just a symbol of love and tradition. It was also tied to a significant portion of the family's wealth. According to the terms of Mark's grandmother's will, the person who held the ring had control over a trust fund that had been set up for the family. That's why she had been so desperate to get it back. Not just to hurt me, but to maintain control over the family's finances. I was stunned. All this time, the fight over the ring had been about more than just pride or tradition. It had been about money and power. I showed the letter to Mark, and he looked just as shocked as I was. "I had no idea," he said. "My mom never told me any of this." We realized that his mother had been manipulating everyone, Mark, Clara, even me, to keep control of the trust fund. But now, with the ring in my possession, that control had shifted to me. Mark and I knew we had to confront his mother again, but this time, it wasn't just about the ring. It was about the future of our family. We arranged to meet her at her house, and when we arrived, she was waiting for us in the living room. She looked tired but determined. Mark started the conversation by asking her why she had kept the truth about the trust fund from him. She sighed and said, "I didn't want you to know because I didn't want you to feel burdened by it. But I also didn't want to lose control. I thought if I could keep the ring, I could keep everything together." I could see the pain in her eyes, but I also knew that her actions had caused so much damage. I told her that we couldn't move forward as a family if there were still secrets and lies between us. She nodded and said, "You're right. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I'm ready to face the consequences." She handed me a set of documents, the legal papers for the trust fund. "It's yours now," she said. "Do with it what you think is best." As we left her house that day, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I had won the battle, but it didn't feel like a victory. Mark's mother had finally let go of her need for control, but it had come at a great cost. I knew that healing our family would take time, but for the first time, I felt like it was possible. In the months that followed, Mark and I worked hard to rebuild our relationship and our family. We decided to use the trust fund to create something positive, a foundation to help families in need, focusing on financial literacy and support. It felt like a way to honor Mark's grandmother's legacy, while also breaking free from the cycle of control and manipulation that had defined his family for so long. Mark's mother kept her distance at first, but over time, she began to reach out. She apologized again, and this time, it felt more sincere. She started attending family gatherings again, and while things were still awkward at times, there was a sense of progress. Mark and I set clear boundaries, and she respected them. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As for the ring, I still wore it, but it no longer felt like a burden. It was a reminder of everything we had been through and how far we had come. Mark and I had faced some of the toughest challenges a couple could face, but we had come out stronger on the other side. We had learned to stand up for ourselves, to communicate openly, and to prioritize our relationship above all else. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, watching the sunset, Mark turned to me and said, "I'm proud of us. We didn't let anything tear us apart." I smiled